Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh and welcome to an all new World of Warships gameplay. In this episode I'll be sailing out in the Tier 4 American carrier known as the Langley in a Tier 4 Domination match on the map Solomon Islands. The purpose of this video is for me to summarise my first impressions of the carrier rework introduced as of update 0.8.0 with regards to the introductory experience that a player new to carriers would have, starting off at Tier 4 with either the Langley or its Japanese counterpart, the Hosho. As I analyse the gameplay, in which I'm in a division with my friend Z, I'd like to draw your attention to two main areas for discussion. Number 1. Isolated targets. Where possible I intend to focus on enemy ships that are alone, lowering the amount of AA available to defend them against my planes. And number 2. Strike versus bleed damage. Against larger ships, battleships and cruisers, I aim to use my dive bombers and rocket fighters to set fires that will add bleed damage on top of my strike damage. With the forward covered, let us get into the gameplay. As we load into the match, I should point out that we're looking at a replay here and not live gameplay footage, which means there's going to be some aspects missing from the screen. 3 in particular, the first one being the aiming reticle when we come in for a strike on an enemy ship, where we're not going to see where we're aiming, but instead we're only going to see the outputs of our attack. The second bit, on the navigation screen as depicted here, or the tactical map if you will, you're not going to see the course I'm plotting, and my initial intention is to head towards the southern island of Bravo, where we're going to be hiding behind that, angling our ship up towards objective Charlie to provide us with cover, but also the potential to rotate up towards Charlie if our team are successful in taking Charlie, and then rotate anti-clockwise around the map, assuming that objective Alpha will fall in favour of the enemy team. And Z is going to be taking a similar approach, supporting the push on objective Bravo initially, and then moving up towards Charlie. The third item that will be missing every so often is the health bar of my plane squadron, which will appear and disappear depending on which squadron comes up, and every so often it just seems to disappear anyway. But nonetheless, we'll see what we can do. Now I started off with my rocket fighter squadron, because we can use this to provide our team with intelligence and scout the positioning of the enemy fleet. These are the fastest planes available, and using our boost we'll be able to get to the enemy fleet as quickly as possible to catch them just as they've spawned in effectively. And straight away we spot that there are 2 French Tier 4 cruisers going towards objective Alpha. We've also got the Orion, the Tier 4 British battleship heading towards Alpha, and we'll be spotting the Shenyang, the Tier 4 Pan-Asian destroyer making its way there shortly. Which means our team can now start preparing for that engagement. We rotate around towards the northern portion, i.e. north of objective Bravo within the enemy spawn, and we're seeing the Tenryu, a Kaiser, a Hosho, and also the Wicks, and we spotted already 8 enemy ships, 8 out of 12. And the rest of the enemy ships will be spotted making their way towards objective Charlie, while our team having already spotted the V170 and the Danae. Now the reason I'm focusing on the Wicks here, with them using their smoke screen to successfully conceal their position against my rocket fighters, and they've moved out of that smoke now, is because I want to release my friendly destroyers from objective Bravo, with our V170 and G101 contesting the objective, and they're going to go toe to toe against the Wicks. The idea being that with each strike, if I'm not successful in hitting the Wicks, I'm applying mental pressure to the player to make them have to consider not only the strikes from my planes, but also the strikes from my friendly destroyers. And over time, that will build up to a situation where they cannot concentrate on both. They have to focus on one and they'll fall to the other or take considerable damage from the other. And we've already managed to achieve a single rocket hit and successfully defend, and we've pushed the Wicks out of their smoke screen effectively and pushed them northeast of objective Bravo. They will be rotating back into the objective very shortly, and I'm anticipating that by bringing the dive bombers up, and hopefully if we can land 1 or 2 dive bombs on the Wicks, we'll be able to deal much more damage, as dive bombs are very powerful against destroyers, as we're about to see. Now for our initial attack run, the Wicks goes back into its smoke screen, and what I try to do here is use the firepower, or the traces of their firepower, in order to follow them in their smoke, and also their anti-aircraft batteries, but I come in well behind the ship. Instead, what this encourages the Wicks to do is actually pull back out of their smoke, and with the pressure being applied from our G101, who's just charging through objective Bravo towards them, good on them, it's really putting the Wicks under a lot of pressure not to be able to maintain their position in the smoke screen. And it means, as I said previously, they have to concentrate on one of us and not the other, and the Wicks is forming into quite a linear path right now, and we can get a drop on them. Now turn under us at this point, which makes it much more difficult to hit the target, but nonetheless we will get 1 bomb on target at this point. It deals no HP damage, but it does achieve incapacitation on one of their torpedo tubes and also sets them on fire. Now if they do not have the damage control party consumable available, that means that fire is going to stick and that torpedo tube is going to be out of action temporarily, limiting their ability to use torpedoes against our friendly destroyers. We come in for our final attack run and we'll get another bomb on target here, dealing HP damage, and it's a rewarding hit for 2,409. Incapacitating 2 modules as well. Now in all of that action, one may be asking straight away, well, what do I mean about the fact if the Wix turns underneath my dive bombers, it's harder to hit them? Well, what you have to consider with the aiming reticule, at least the Langley's dive bombs, is that it's elliptical, with the idea being that the ellipse expands from top to bottom from your perspective rather than in the sides, which means attacking an enemy ship when it's sailing away or towards your dive bombers is going to be the most accurate means of hitting the target, because then you'll have the full profile, the full length of the ship within your aiming reticule. Whereas if it's sailing horizontal to you, so that's showing broadside to the position of your bombers, it's going to be a harder target to hit because the dispersion of your bombs is such that they'll hit on either side of the ship, they'll straddle the ship. Bringing the rocket fighters there, we aimed a little bit too high on the target, meaning that we missed, but we did hit with one, and we're coming around for a much better shot this second time round, while the Wix being focused on tackling our G101 mean we can hit them on their broadside. And this is a successful application of the fact that rockets spread horizontally, not vertically. Again, another aiming ellipse. And this time we find the ellipse on the rockets in particular is ideal for attacking ships that are giving you broadside, simply because that broadside will fill up the entirety of the aiming reticule, and therefore you'll be able to achieve a higher likelihood of hit compared to if you attack a target that's sailing lengthways towards or away from your bombers. Sorry, in that case rocket fighters I should say. But again, talking about bombers now, we're bringing out the dive bombers once again to help finish off the Wix, but they fall to the sustained fire of our G101 and V170, and that means our destroyers are now released from Objective Bravo. In return, we look for the next isolated ship on the enemy team, and this time it's going to be the Danae, the Tier IV British light cruiser. Now again, going for isolated ships works in our favour because it minimises the amount of anti-aircraft fire that will be aimed at our fighters, and therefore, or our dive bombers in this case, and it gives us the ability to achieve more strikes on target, or at least less pressure, and we can take more time in aiming onto the target and successfully achieving a devastating strike. We're going with our first attack run here. We're unfortunate to miss, falling behind the enemy ship, but coming in with our second attack run, the results are going to be more rewarding, and our hope is that we achieve a citadel hit. With the lack of armour on that Danae, we can get our dive bombs through the citadel and achieve 7,300 damage per bomb. Will it work this time? Bingo! That's a huge chunk of health removed from that enemy light cruiser, and let's see if we can come around with one final strike to finish them off. As we do so, note that I'm taking my time in aiming in. I'm not trying to rush the drops, I'm trying to spend as much time as possible in the aiming reticule, that way increasing the accuracy of my strike and perhaps getting the ship completely out of the game as they're healing the damage dealt. Unfortunately we missed with that final strike, and now we're going to send our rocket fighters to finish it off. Now what one has to consider at this point is I'm becoming fixated on the Danae, because look on the minimap right now, you can see that the enemy Kaiser, their Tier 4 German battleship, is isolated northeast of Objective Charlie. We have 4 ships engaging it, but the concept here is not the fact the numbers of ships engaging it, but the fact that that battleship, which is going to be highly durable and can take a lot of damage, has the ability to finish off our French cruiser, the Dugatron, that's contested Objective Charlie, and then potentially finish off another ship, including the Z's Yubari, the Tier 4 Japanese premium light cruiser. What I could potentially be doing here is supporting my teammates in finishing off that battleship, and as a result freeing up on Objective Charlie to take it, and keeping some ships alive. Instead, focusing on the Danae, I will try to eliminate the ship, but is it really the most pressing matter for our team right now? Nonetheless, as the Danae starts to turn, we decide to turn away and come in on its broadside to maximise the number of rockets that can potentially hit. Remember, as I said earlier, the aiming ellipse of the rocket fighters is one that's horizontal, not vertical, and here we'll see a lot of rockets go in. Absolutely brilliant, dealing 5,054 damage. And because it was unsaturated on the broadside there, that meant we did the maximum damage per rocket. And now we come in for the finishing blow, taking this light cruiser out of the game. So with them down, what's next? Well, we're going to go after that Kaiser, and we're going to be bringing out our dive bombers here with the intention of setting a fire that will help chip into their health pool, as well as the initial alpha strike damage. But in return, we lose Z. And this emphasises my point earlier, think of the damage we could have perhaps dealt in the time window that we dedicated towards delivering damage to that Danae. Perhaps Z would still be alive right now, but nonetheless, it's something that we'll just have to think about and improve upon next time. As we make our way over, why am I emphasising the need for fires as well as the initial strike damage? What one has to consider is the overall alpha strike damage, if you will, that initial attack, is going to be quite light in terms of the health damage that you'll see. We're not going to be dealing the damage numbers of full broadside from our friendly Kobe, for example, against the broadside of that Kaiser with armour piercing. But instead, for every hit we achieve, we'll be dealing say 2,000, 3,000 damage if we get the maximum number of hits. There was 1,686, but because we've also set a fire, what it means is if our opponent does not have damage control party available, that fire sticks and it bleeds away their health. And it puts them in a pressing state of, well, if they get their damage control party consumable available, with such low health port available to them right now, they'll need to use it to get rid of that fire, and then we'll come around with a successive dive bombing strike to set another fire, or our teammates with their high explosive shells can set subsequent fires, or flood in the case of destroyer, or a cruiser with torpedoes, and that bleed damage only continues to build up. And the emphasis really here is that carriers have shifted to a dynamic, I would argue, or particularly at the lower tiers now, of not just the initial strike damage, but also that continuous ticking damage, the bleed damage, and we want to try and maximise that where possible. Because so far, well, we were 9 minutes into the game and then we've only dealt 27,500 damage. If we roll back to the world prior to the carrier rework, we would have had a lot more damage on the table, I would argue, at least from the experience that I can remember. But we are going to continue increasing our damage output over the time with that emphasis on setting fires and causing the bleed. Now, talking about bleed, what about flooding? Why no torpedo bombers being used? Well, as I'm going to explain after the gameplay, I feel that the torpedo bombers at Tier 4, at least in the case of the Langley, really do not warrant themselves as rewarding to play right now. I feel that I can get much greater damage through rocket fighters and dive bombers being repeated over and over in a cycle rather than bringing out torpedo bombers. That's not to say you can't do considerably well with the torpedo bombers, but I feel that the combination of their ability to deal considerable damage only really against particular ships in particular scenarios, like big battleships that say in broadside to the torpedo bomber at a given time, and low chance of flooding means that you can just get a lot more overtime from the combination of rocket fighters and dive bombers. Again, we'll elaborate later. But for now, having used our rockets there to set a fire on the Orion, we're going to see that that fire is going to stick and we can build up the damage, and rather than spend additional time attacking the Orion and perhaps setting a second fire which will cause them to use their damage control party, because remember it's not always sensible to use your damage control party to extinguish a single fire, and the Orion's perhaps sticking to that principle, we won't know for certain. We're making a quick attack run on the H1, the Tier 4 French cruiser, and then we break off and bring out the dive bombers. So that way what we're intending to do here is maximise the amount of damage we deal in a period of time, rather than just trying to keep those rocket fighters in the right position to get a certain amount of damage from them, because we'll be able to deliver more through our dive bombers now coming in. Now, one thing to consider as well is we're now attacking a more concentrated group of enemy ships, so the longer we spend around here, the more damage our plane's going to take, and you'll see that on the health bar, or at least in the number of flak bursts coming up from these enemy ships right now as we fly through a couple of them. As we come in, note that the fighter squadron's just been sent up from the H1, their catapult fighter, and what I intend to do here is make a single strike against the Orion and then run for it, because I know if that fighter gets onto the back of my dive bombers, they're going to be finished. So we make a single strike, we set a follow-up fire, with the Orion having put out their previous fire. It was put out quickly enough to assume that was their damage control party consumable being used, and before those fighters from the H1 can latch onto my dive bombers, I've got away and I've sent them back home, which means they're safe, we haven't lost any planes from that attack. Now we bring out the rocket fighters once again, recycling them in, and this time we're going to be going for either the Orion or the H1 once again. And we can see in the top right corner our damage is now built up to almost 42,000, and it will continue to increase. And this is the potency of fires being set and allowed to burn. And this rinse and repeat of keep striking, build up a fire, keep striking, build up another fire, exhaust the opponent's DCP, high damage control party, and then go again. We haven't been doing too much spotting, I should argue, and perhaps in this instance, because we're facing a low amount of anti-aircraft fire, it's a Tier 4, Tier 3 game, we don't have to worry too much about the amount of anti-aircraft fire unless it's a large cluster of enemy ships. If this was a Tier 5 game, we'd perhaps be more reserved and be using our planes more for the spotting role. But as we come around the corner here, we're aiming for the enemy French cruiser at this point, because it's pressing in towards the southern quadrant of Bravo, and we make a long distance strike over the landmass, and we successfully hit with 10 rockets there, delivering almost 5,500 damage, and setting 2 fires which the H1s instantly put out. Which means as we come around now, we can go for a follow-up fire if needs be, attacking on the broadside once again with our rockets, and achieving a nice number of hits, 5 hits, getting a defend there, and 1,256 damage. And now we can bring out the dive bombers that have just landed, refueled and repaired. At least some of them have by looks of things. We can bring them out and attack the French cruiser and finish it off. Now up to 53,000 damage, and remember earlier when we were at, say, the 9-minute mark, we were only at approximately, say, 30,000 damage? Well, it's built up considerably. Now we come charging over, using our boost here, and one thing I should point out as well is I felt no compulsion to use the engine boost consumable to replay a ship, simply because we seem to be in the right position here to deal with the situation on command. We come down and finish off the cruiser. And what I mean by that last point about being in the right position is the fact, look where we're positioned on the minimap. We're quite close into the front line. We're rotated anti-clockwise around through Charlie, which means we're heading back towards Bravo now, and with the enemy fleet pretty much diminished at this point, we've got no threat remaining, apart from the Shenyang, who's so far away they'll be more pressed against our Wyoming and Corbeil combination rather than trying to hunt us down. And what I type into the chat very shortly as I send my rocket fighters over towards the smokescreen of the Shenyang is that I'm going to spot them, because they're currently using that smokescreen in order to conceal their position and fire on our battleships. But shortly that spotting is going to run out after 20 seconds of our battleships firing, and it means the Shenyang is by itself, it hasn't got any vision unless it leaves the smokescreen, or alternatively you've just got to wait over the top of the smokescreen until it expires. And because it's a Pan-Asian destroyer, that means the smokescreen's duration is going to be rather limited, so we just sit over the top, bring our planes away a little bit. The idea being here is that our planes are going to be spotted before we spot the Shenyang typically, and the idea is that as soon as our planes are spotted, we'll know where to come in. And when I say where to come in, the idea being that depending on if we're spotted now, which we have, they must have been coming out towards the western side of their smokescreen, and that means we can come down with our rocket fighters, keep them spotted, deal damage, and give our teammates the opportunity to also fire their guns and deal damage. 2 rocket hits there, picking up a small amount of damage, and let's come around for the finishing blow. And this is going to wrap up the game. With a comfortable victory for our team, we can see that our battle performance amounted to a total damage output of 55,793 HP. Moving on to the team scores, we can see that we placed second in our team in terms of base experience earned with 1,097. Our role over the course of this game was to continuously strike lone enemy ships, using their lack of AA cover to our advantage in trying to maximise the damage output of each attack run. Whilst this approach did benefit our team in the long run, it could be argued that this style of play was to an extent selfish and meant we did not directly support our team. A clear example of this was Z falling into the enemy Kaiser, the Tier IV German battleship, whilst we were finishing off the Danae, the Tier IV British light cruiser. By becoming fixated on finishing off the Danae, which was not engaged in our team, we left the Kaiser alive just long enough to eliminate Z from the match, whereas we could have supported our team in sinking the Kaiser as it was also sailing alone. As a result, this serves to highlight both how one should avoid target fixation and remember to support their team in bringing down the ships which are leading the enemy fleet's main push where possible. Additionally, it should be noted that the gameplay shown reflected an ideal matchmaking scenario for a Tier IV carrier. We were top tier, meaning we'd be facing ships with significantly weaker AA suites than those of Tier V ships, which we can potentially face. The playstyle shown here of focusing on isolated enemy ships is the same playstyle I would apply to a Tier V game, as the potential AA damage from a group of Tier V ships, particularly from cruisers and battleships, can lead to a squadron of planes falling out of the sky before they have even made their first strike. As for our detailed report, we have one key item to note with regards to the distribution of our damage caused. We can see that 32% of our damage output was from the 8 fires we set. This reflects our intended approach of looking to not only achieve successful strikes for our dive bombers and rocket fighters, but also set fires which would build upon these strikes through the application of bleed damage. This approach was made possible through the ability to strike an enemy ship multiple times with a single aircraft squadron. The idea being that we aim to achieve a fire with the first strike, encouraging our target to use their damage control party to extinguish the fire. Once this has expired, we come around for a follow-up strike or two to set another fire which will last the full duration as our target no longer has the damage control party available. Alternatively, if our target chooses to let the initial fire burn, we can switch to another target with the same approach in mind. The end result of this is that between each strike, we'll continue to damage the enemy fleet for a series of fires, or temporarily remove their damage control party consumable to expose them to the risk of being set on fire or flooded by our allies. Finally, coming on to credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we took away 142,389 silver credits and 1,811 commander experience. In conclusion, I feel that the introductory experience offered with the Tier IV carriers is a welcoming one, which allows a new player to get to grips with the core mechanics of the 3 different plane classes. Whilst the alpha strike damage output of these carriers is rather low, I would argue this encourages the need to tie strike damage into applying bleed damage through fires and flooding. If one is successful in applying this combination, the damage dealt will increase significantly. Additionally, the matchmaking spread of plus or minus 1 means that the levels of AA you face, particularly in the +1 scenario, are not overly punishing. However, attacks on groups of ships clustered together in each other's AA zones will be punished, even in the -1 scenario. This encourages the need to strike isolated enemy ships where possible. One area which I think needs to be worked on is the potency of torpedo bombers. As you have seen in today's gameplay, I felt no compulsion to use torpedo bombers at any point due to their low overall damage output, which can be difficult to achieve. Breaking this down, I would argue that firstly, the difficulty in achieving damage in the first place is due to the fact you can only strike with a single torpedo bomber in each attack run, mean it is rather easy to miss the target unless you're focusing on a larger ship, for example a battleship. And secondly, when you do successfully hit the target, whilst the strike damage is decent, the chance of flooding appears to be rather low, making it difficult to achieve bleed damage. I would argue that with the flooding rework, which has seen the potential bleed damage of a flood reduced to be more in line with a fire, the flooding chance could be raised to an extent, thereby encouraging the use of torpedo bombers, as I would see using them against the right targets as being just as rewarding as dive bombers and rocket fighters. Still, overall I would say that the carrier rework is off to a flying start at Tier 4, and I look forward to sailing out in the Tier 6 carriers in the near future. With that, I've been TX141. If you enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. Additionally, if you do not currently play World of Warships but are thinking of now giving this highly enjoyable game a try, you can sign up today using the link in the video description. Alas, that is all I've got time for today, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, as always, I bid you fair winds and following seas.